On today's Locked On Jayhawks, where are things at with the Kansas Bigs and who are some offseason targets that they could look at the center and power forward position?
You are Locked On Jayhawks, your daily podcast on the Kansas Jayhawks, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
I'm Derek Johnson. Give me a follow on Twitter at DJohnsonRadio. You can reach out to me there if you have any questions or comments with the show. Thanks for making Locked On Jayhawks your first listen every day. We are free and available anywhere you get your podcasts, including on our YouTube page where you can like and subscribe to the show. And on today's edition of Locked On Jayhawks, we're taking inventory of the big position for KU and looking at offseason targets that KU could possibly go after, whether it's the transfer portal or freshman. Hint, they're going to be transfer portal guys. I think this is a very interesting position in general for KU because there is a lot that just banks on, are guys coming back or are they not? Whereas it's like, well, even if Johnny Furphy comes back, you could still add another wing. Even if, this guy, like even with DeJuan Harris coming back, you can still add another guard and you added Riley Kugel who can be kind of a 2 or 3, whatever it is. But like with the big position, it is going to be very dependent on what happens with Hunter Dickinson. So let's start it there. We're going to go real quick before we get into the offseason targets here, just a few minutes before we get to that. What is Kansas bringing back at the position specifically to set them up for what they could be looking for in the offseason? Well, we know for sure Parker Braun is gone. He has graduated. He has exhausted his eligibility. You are adding Flory Bidunga, who is undergoing the McDonald's All-American game right now. He'll be an incoming freshman and has like a 7'4" wingspan, like 6'8", 6'9", jumps out of the gym, really good athlete with an insanely high motor. Honestly, if you look back at the recruiting profiles and the similar height and long wingspan, kind of a lot of similarities between Flory Bidunga and what you had with Sheck Diallo. Now, I know that maybe sounds like a bit of a scare, like, oh, what does that mean? Because Sheck Diallo didn't do a ton at Kansas. But think about it this way. If Sheck Diallo didn't have the NCAA stuff, would he have stayed for year 2 or maybe even a year 3 at Kansas? And he was like a early second-round pick or maybe even like a first-round pick, had a long career in the NBA. I feel like if Sheck Diallo would have been at Kansas for 2 or 3 years, he would have been an absolute stud by year 2 or year 3. And that's kind of how I view Flory Bidunga. Like if he comes in this year and he might be the backup center, he might be the third string center this year, depending on what happens in the offseason for KU. He might play 10 minutes a game. He might play 15 minutes a game, whatever it is. He could be somebody who becomes an absolute star by year 2, year 3, if that is in the cards for everything. So I don't think that's a bad thing at all, but I do think there are some similarities there. Obviously, you hope for even more to kind of hit the ground running right away since Sheck Diallo didn't really crack the rotation year 1. Then you have the guys who can come back. KJ Adams, technically he can be a wing, but the way I view it, he's more of a 4-5 man, and I think it would probably behoove Kansas most if he is playing more 5 than he is playing at the 4. And if you want to play him, 10 minutes at the 4 and then 15 minutes at the 5 or 5 minutes at the 4 and 20 minutes at the 5, or, again, depends kind of who's back and everything like that. But I think that would be better for Kansas. Hunter Dickinson could come back for a super senior season because his first year was the kind of COVID year where he gets the extra year. And that's kind of the big one. That is the crux of all this. And it's really hard to kind of go through what targets they'd be going to in the different tiers until we know that. And then you have Zach Clemence, who took a redshirt year. So he was going to transfer to UC Santa Barbara, never went on campus, just decided he didn't really want to do that. So he talked to Bill Self and decided to come back and redshirt this year. KU was looking for more practice bodies because they were a thinner team. And they decided to say, hey, this will give good reps for Hunter Dickinson in practice. We need the practice body. You redshirt. And then we can get some extra tape for you to send out to other coaches if you want to transfer again. I know that was mentioned in like the Kansas City Star article that like his mom talked to the Kansas City Star and said that like, yeah, we can enter back into the portal the next year. So that could be something. Or maybe Kansas, likes what they saw and he can come back and maybe have a role on the team. I don't know, whatever ends up happening, but he can decide to come back or transfer again, depending on what he wants to do. The one obviously, that is going to have the biggest ripple effects on all this obviously is the Hunter Dickinson stuff. But I mean, like if KJ Adams and Hunter Dickinson both return with Flory Bidunga coming in, are you playing the same way or are you switching things up a little bit where, like I said, now you're, having KJ Adams come off the bench, or I don't know. We just don't see Bill Self demote guys from the starting lineups that often. We don't see very often the guys even play less minutes than the year before. So it's like, it's definitely possible, but it's just not something we see a ton of from him. So it's going to be very interesting how that all works. And then if you do have like Hunter Dickinson back, are you content with just saying, hey, we're good with Hunter Dickinson and Flory Bidunga? like if we add another big man, it's just going to be like a body, basically a Parker Braun type, where it's like, if that's our third string center, we only plan on him playing if there's like foul trouble or this guy's injured or something like that. Because, what really good big man are you going to get to sign up to be a third big? You know what I mean? So I think that kind of becomes interesting in how you approach this. Or maybe that guy can just be Zach Clemence. Maybe you say, hey, if we have Hunter Dickinson, Flory Bidunga, Zach Clemence, and that's our rotation at the 5, KJ Adams could be in there. Like, we're content with what we have on the roster. So this is one of those where, like, at the end of the day, they're going to add another wing. They're going to add probably another guard. There is a real world scenario where if all these guys just say, I'm coming back, you don't even have to add another center or another big man. So this one kind of depends. But the type of player you're looking for is this. If Hunter Dickinson goes, you could be looking for just another center, right? And just a starting level center. If Hunter Dickinson comes back, maybe you're looking for somebody who can play the 4 and stretch the floor a little bit and can shoot. Maybe you're just looking for a backup big man. But I think if you are going to bring like KJ Adams back, and let's say Hunter Dickinson goes and Bill Self says, I want to play KJ at the 4 still, then you're looking for like a big man who is kind of an athletic 5 who can shoot it a little bit. So it really does depend what you're trying to do and what type of player you're going at. Let's talk about some of the different players that are available to KU in the transfer portal right now at the big position, and who are some offseason targets for the Jayhawks in just a moment. When you're hiring for small businesses, you want to find quality professionals that are right for their role. That's why you have to check out LinkedIn Jobs. LinkedIn Jobs has the tools to help you find the right professionals for your team faster and for free. LinkedIn isn't just another job board. They have a vast network of more than 1 billion professionals, which makes it the best place to hire. Gives you access to professionals you can't find anywhere else. LinkedIn does all that while making the process easy and intuitive. Hiring is easy when you have that many quality candidates. So easy, in fact, that 86% of small businesses get a qualified candidate within 24 hours. LinkedIn knows that small businesses are wearing so many hats, and right now might not have the time or resources to hire. Post your job for free at linkedin.com/lockedoncollege. That is linkedin.com/lockedoncollege. Post your job for free. Terms and conditions apply. All right, our off-season targets. Reminder, we have 4 different tiers. Tier 1 is somebody who we view to be not just an immediate starter, but would be like right away, they'd be an all-league projected player. Tier 2 is these are players that are probably starters, and yeah, they could develop into being that all-league type of player. Tier 3 is possibly a starter. I think in the case of the big man position, depends on what's going to happen with Hunter Dickinson and KJ Adams. At the very least, they're a player that you would bring in and expect to be a part of the rotation, even if they would be a backup. Then you have Tier 4, which is like definitive bench player. That could be in a couple ways. That could be as a developmental player, or that could be as a player who you bring in where it's like the idea is like Parker Braun was a Tier 4. The idea was that he's going to be, he played minutes. He was a part of the rotation, but he was a bench player, right? So there's different tiers that we're going to kind of go through this with. And there can actually be like Tier 4 players who might actually be better than a Tier 3 player, for instance, just how I sorted this, that makes a better fit for Kansas, but we'll get into that in a moment. Let's start with Tier 1. These are immediate starters, all-league type players. This would only happen if Hunter Dickinson leaves. So if Hunter Dickinson leaves and Bill Self says, I don't want to play, I don't want my center position to just be KJ Adams, Flory Bidunga, and possibly Zach Clemence. And he says, I want to go out there and get a immediate impact center transfer to fill the shoes left by Hunter Dickinson should he go. These are those players you're looking at. I think number 1 is Cliff Omoruyi. He is a 6'11" center from Rutgers, played 4 years there. He has 1 year left, 10.5 points per game, over 8 rebounds per game this past season, and 3 blocks per game. He shot over 51% from the floor. Took a few 3-pointers, didn't really hit them consistently though at 20%, but that's not really his game. What was interesting though, Rutgers wasn't as good this year. Last year, they were a better team. They had a couple other players like Cam Spencer, who's now on UConn, and they were, I think, the first team out of the tournament. And that year, when he had better floor spacing around him, better guards around him, he put up over 13 points per game and 9.5 rebounds per game. But this dude is mostly about his defense. If you're bringing on Cliff Omoruyi, he's a good like rim roller and a good dunker, but he's not like a high usage center. He's not going to be somebody who you throw to on the block a bunch and he scores with regularity on the post. He's going to, which actually could be fine because you're throwing down lob dunks from DeJuan Harris. And if you have the right spacing around him, he's going to get some dunks in the offense, but great rebounder. He had 11 games this year with 4 or more blocks, including 8 blocks against Wisconsin and 8 blocks against Illinois. This is one of the best defensive big men in the country. So this would be a bit of a shift. If you're Bill Self and you see how the Gonzaga game went, you're probably licking your chops to go, hey, if Hunter Dickinson does leave, let's get a center first big man or a defensive first big man. And then if we get a defensive first big man, we can just fill it with offensive players around him and DeJuan. DeJuan and him can be really good defensive tandem, and we just have really good offensive players 2 through 4 that carry us on that end. I think that is a very appealing lineup construction. But he was 88th and 89th percentile defensively the last 2 years, 57th percentile, so still at least above average in post-ups, 86th in pick and roll, and 77th at the rim. He has heard from Kansas, and supposedly Kansas is setting up like a Zoom call and doing some other stuff. The other tier 1 guy is Maxime Reynaud, 7'1" from Stanford, 3 years there. He has 1 year left. This is kind of opposite from Omoruyi. This would almost be a little bit more like a Hunter Dickinson pickup, but not as high profile. Reynaud, 15.5 points, 9.6 rebounds, good passer, 2 assists per game. 57% from the floor, takes about 2 threes per game at 36%. And he's a pretty mobile big. He actually had 29 points at Arizona this year. And he's like I would say a slightly bouncier, not as strong version of Hunter Dickinson, because very good handedness and on the block and everything. He actually had 37 dunks this year. Hunter Dickinson was second on KU with 17, so a little bit more springy, and that allows him to be a little bit more mobile on the defensive end. So actually a little higher potential on that end, but he's not as dominant on the block, and also was on a worse team with Stanford, although Hunter Dickinson didn't have a great team last year at Michigan. But he would be a nice addition. Omoruyi more for the defense. Reynaud would be more for the offense if you lose Hunter Dickinson. And then this one just happened today. Vladislav Golden is a 7'1" center, 3 years at Florida Atlantic, 1 year at Texas Tech. He has 1 year left, 15.7 points, 6.9 rebounds, 1.6 blocks, 67% from the floor. This would be your best, like, back to the basket post score. Reynaud is a little bit of an everything score. Golden would be your best back to the basket score. Golden, the better rim protector than Reynaud, not as good as Omoruyi. You could argue Reynaud, though, is probably the more mobile defender for covering like pick and rolls and stuff. And so much so, Reynaud was 58th percentile defensively. Reynaud was also 89th percentile post up and 90th in catch and shoot opportunities. Golden was only 26th percentile defensively, so was not good on defense this year for FAU, but the year before he was in the 88th percentile. So I don't know what that means. He's not really a pick and roll big man, but he was in the 83rd percentile in post up offense, with a lot of attempts that they kind of fed him the ball. That would be another guy you kind of go to. But if I'm choosing here, I would choose Cliff Omoruyi should Hunter Dickinson go. But that's if Hunter Dickinson goes. Maybe Hunter Dickinson comes back and none of those guys are really at play. What about tier 2? These guys are probably a starter. I think it probably means they lost Hunter Dickinson, but there is a world where they could bring this guy on when maybe that's not the case. I originally was going to have Brandon Huntley Hatfield on here, but he narrowed down his list to 4. Kansas wasn't on it, so no need to talk more than that about it. Brandon Garrison is the one guy I have on here on tier 2. 6'11" from Oklahoma State. Only played 1 year with the Cowboys, so he has 3 years left to play. And that's kind of a boon that, you know, even if he wouldn't end up being a start, let's say you bring on Brandon Garrison and you decide, you know, we're going to start KJ at the 5, and then we'll have our backup bigs be Garrison and Flory Bidunga. That would be a really good center rotation, in my opinion. And you would still have multiple years left with Garrison where it's like, okay, and then you'll be the starter the next year, or it'll be Flory Bidunga or whoever wins that competition. Or it is a possibility that if Hunter Dickinson goes, Garrison could come in and be the starter right away at center. 7.5 points per game, over 5 rebounds, 1.5 assists, 1.5 blocks per game, 57% from the floor. He actually had an offer from KU in high school when he was a top 50 recruit, according to 24/7 Sports. Plays with good awareness. He's a good defensive player, 1.5 blocks per game. He's not like a crazy athlete, but he seems to know where to be and was a good rim protector. He was overall 74th percentile defensively on Synergy. Now, he wasn't a good post-up player, 10th percentile in post-ups, but you get him with Bill Self, who typically teaches that stuff well. And year 2 for a guy who's top 50 recruit, I bet you that gets a little bit better. He was 76th in pick and roll as the roll man. That would work well with DeJuan Harris, 89th percentile in transition. So he did run the floor well or knew where to go. Only 17th in jump shooting. So this would be a guy who would be kind of a high upside play where you would be expecting him to grow into more. And I think would be a nice pickup for KU. But again, if Hunter Dickinson comes back and you're Brandon Garrison, now if KU can pull off this swoon and they go, hey, we got Hunter Dickinson back and we added Brandon Garrison, that is a hell of a center rotation with Dickinson, Garrison, and Bidunga at that point. And if you use KJ at the 5. But if you're Garrison from his point of view, do you go, hey, why would I come there to come off the bench after I was like a full-time starter. And yes, you could say, oh, but you could be the starter 2 years after that. Well, that's no guarantee either, because Flory Bidunga is the number one center coming in from the class. And what if he's in front of me the next year as the starter, and then all of a sudden I've wasted 2 years away? So I don't know what the likelihood of that one is, unless Hunter goes, but still certainly one to keep an eye on. And I think he's a good player. All right, let's get on to our tier 3 and tier 4 in just a moment here with Locked On Jayhawks. Passion, drive, and patience. The formula for winning championships is also what keeps your ride or die alive. eBay Motors has everything you need to maintain your vehicle and level it up to peak performance. Superchargers, roof racks, exhaust kits, LED headlights, and more. Whether you're into speed, power, or style, eBay Motors has got you covered. With over 122 million parts for your number one ride or die, you'll always find exactly what you're looking for. And with eBay Guaranteed Fit, your part is guaranteed to fit your ride every time or your money back. Because with eBay Motors, you're burning rubber, not cash. With all the parts you need at the prices you want, it's easy to make your car the MVP and bring home that dub. Keep your ride or die alive with ebaymotors.com. Eligible items only. Exclusions apply. eBay Guaranteed Fit, only available to U.S. customers. Let's finish up with Tier 3 and Tier 4. Thank you to the everydayers tuning in to this episode. Our past episodes, we talked a lot about Riley Kugel committing to KU, did a deep dive, and then we had our commitment one that kind of worked out with the timing of all that. We're going to actually do a deep dive on Zeke Mayo, who I believe is scheduled to visit KU. I guess this episode's coming out on Tuesday today, and we'll go a little bit more into how he would fit with KU on tomorrow's episode of the show. We'll also keep you updated with the rest of the transfer portal stuff. And this Friday, we're going to try to do some Football Friday stuff moving forward, where we'll talk a little spring football and off-season football for KU on our Fridays here with Locked On Jayhawks. So make sure you're subscribed anywhere you get podcasts. All right, Tier 3 this is somebody who is still a possible starter depending on what happens with Hunter and KJ. But at the very least, this should be a rotation piece. Still probably likely a backup with both or one of them back. The first one here is Jacoby Coles. He is a 6'8" power forward, but did play some 5-man for TCU this past year. Started his career at Butler. He has 1 year left to play. 10 points, 4 rebounds per game, 49% from the floor. He is a stretch 4-5. 42% from 3 on over 2 attempts per game. I thought he should have shot more. He had 19 points in their NCAA tournament loss to Utah State. He actually played at the prep level with Jalen Wilson. So I don't know if there's some sort of relationship there that can make it work. I don't know what the fit is for KU, but if you're saying you have let's say you get Hunter and KJ back and you have a big man off the bench who can come in and give you 15 solid minutes, who's experienced and shoot threes off the bench, like that's not the worst thing in the world. But he was also 70th percentile defensively. He was 95th percentile in spot-up shooting and 97th percentile in unguarded catch and shoot. Also 74th in post-up. So he's a very skilled offensive player, unselfish. He passes the ball. He's somebody who will, I think, add to a winning environment wherever he goes. Malik Dia is a 6'9" kind of forward type. He's like 240 pounds from Belmont. 1 year at Vanderbilt, so he has that power 6 level in him before he went to Belmont. 2 years left to play. 17 points, about 6 rebounds per game, 49% from the floor, 34 from 3 on almost 4 attempts per game. He went off against Drake, 32 points. He also had 21 points against a good Arizona team. And, he can kind of play that 4 or a smaller 5 as well. 52nd percentile in defense, which playing in the Missouri Valley, that's going to go down a little bit more. He was pretty good in post-up, 60th percentile, 62nd in catch and shoot, 59th in spot-up. So just kind of above average in a lot of different things. I guess one to keep an eye on there. William Kyle III, he is a 6'9" big man from South Dakota State. That's where he was for 2 years. Really, really good athlete. He has 2 years left to play, over 13 points per game. 6.6 rebounds per game. Honestly, with how good of an athlete is, I was surprised it wasn't even more rebounds in that conference, but 1.6 blocks per game, over 62% from the floor. Doesn't really shoot it, but he played really well in the tournament game. 14 points on 6 of 10 shooting. He had 7 rebounds, and he had 4 assists against, obviously, an Iowa State defense that's one of the best in the country. And he's a power athlete, too. He's not just like a quick athlete. He does need a little bit time to load up, but like when he does, it's kind of a 2 feet jumper. He's got a huge vertical. He throws down some power dunks, gets some power blocks. Ironically enough, because I think he won like Summit League Defensive Player of the Year, Synergy didn't like him. He was only 36th percentile in defense on Synergy. Now, there are obviously, some things you have to take a grain of salt with. Some of it can be like, okay, if you're playing a drop coverage and this guy shoots a mid-range shot, like, does that get credited to the guard? Does that get credited to the big man? There's certain things that can go into that can hurt or help a player's synergy rating or something in some of this stuff. But I did find that curious. He was 95th percentile in cutting, which makes sense with his athleticism, 63rd in post-up. He has heard from Kansas, according to Mike Sauter of Herd Hat Sports. And he would be someone where if he's coming off the bench for you and one of your bench big men and then can develop because he has 2 more years left to play too, I think you would feel like you're a very athletic team overall. Sam Alexis is a 6'9" big man from Chattanooga, 2 years left to play, 11 points, 9 rebounds per game, over 2 blocks. This would be more of your classic big man who's just like rim runner, good rebounder, defender off the bench to give you hard, strong minutes. Played well against Auburn, 13 points, 6 rebounds, 3 blocks. Played well against Louisville, 16 points, 11 rebounds, 4 blocks in a couple of their Power 5 games. He was in the 78th percentile defensively, and he was in the 82nd percentile in post-ups. Not a great catch-and-shoot shooter, and he took a lot of them, 54 of them. Only shot 28% there, so you'd like to see that number go up. But there are a lot of things to like about Alexis if he was like in that Tarek Black kind of role for KU, even though Black ended up starting for a lot of the season over Joel Embiid. I don't mean it in that way, but kind of what Tarek Black was by the time Joel Embiid had emerged. Brandon Angel is a 6'8" big man from Stanford. This one would kind of go back in line with like Jacoby Coles. If you want more of a stretch big man, he shot 45% from 3 on 2.5 attempts per game. Also 240 pounds though. Like this is one where it's like, okay, if Hunter Dickinson's gone, you could add Brandon Angel, and like offensively, KJ Adams is the 5 and Angel's the 4 because he can really shoot the ball. And then defensively, you can use Angel as the 5 and KJ Adams as the 4. And you can kind of invert it that way because Angel wasn't a great defender, but he was 85th percentile in spot-up shooting, 96th percentile in post-ups, and he was in the 97th percentile in jump shooting, 94th in catch and shoot. Bit of a smaller sample size. In terms of some of the shooting, because again, 2.5 3-point attempts a game isn't like 6 a game, but still 13 points for him. Like that would be a nice pickup again if you lose Hunter Dickinson and you can kind of play him off of KJ Adams. And then Amari Williams is our last one here in tier 3, 6'10" big man from Drexel, 1 year left, over 12 points, about 8 rebounds per game. He only ranked in the 13th percentile defensively on synergy. I do think he's a little bit better than that, but really good rim runner, 95th percentile in transition, good offensive rebounder, rebounds the ball hard, and he was actually the CAA Defensive Player of the Year with a 7'5" wingspan. I don't know that he plays well in like ball screens and stuff, but he's a really good like rim protector, I think at the very least. And then our tier 4 is bench players. This one will go a little faster. Ben Humrickus, I don't know if that's the right way to pronounce it, former NAIA guy. He went to Evansville, averaged about 15 a game, over 41% from 3 on a 5.5 3-point attempts per game. He's a really good offensive player, more than defense at 6'9". Farrell Payne at 6'9" from Minnesota, 2 years left to play, 10 points, 6 rebounds. Really good athlete, 255 pounds, but he moves well. Defensive rating didn't grade out well, but the athleticism says that the potential is there for him to do that, and he was really good at cutting and as a pick-and-roll man. Then you have Andrew Morgan, 6'10" from North Dakota State, 13 points, 5 rebounds. He's a skilled on the block type of big man, but he didn't play well against some of the power opponents. He had 8 points, 3 rebounds on 4 of 5 against KU in the 2022-23 season. Didn't grade out well defensively on synergy this year, only 28th percentile, but 82nd percentile in post-up. He would be kind of the Mitch Lightfoot off the bench, though Mitch was a better rim protector than Andrew Morgan is. But basically the guy you can bring off the bench and be like, okay, we feel confident giving him the ball on the block as a bench big and he can play, if he's willing to do that, because he just was a starter for 3 years at North Dakota State, and let him, play 10, 15 minutes a game or whatever, and have him hit a couple hook shots. Kenny Poto from Wichita State, this would more so be your like big body, kind of bruiser down low, 9 points, 6 rebounds per game. And he was in the 57th percentile post-up, good offensive rebounder. Michael Nwoko, more of the developmental big, 6'10" from Miami, was a near top 100 recruit. He's got length at 6'10", played a little bit for Miami. And then Dennis Evans is another interesting one because KU had interest in him in high school. 7'1" center from Louisville, has 3 years left to play, only averaged 1.6 points per game. He played 7 games. He started 5 of them as a freshman for Louisville, former really highly recruited guy. But then he was told he was not medically cleared, not just for the rest of the season, but for the foreseeable future and moving forward for the Louisville program. So they just told him like, hey, you're not going to be able to ever play for us. So I don't know what that means. Like, what the heck does that mean with the shoulder injury? Like, how bad is that shoulder? But maybe it's one worth kicking the tires on, developmental big, because maybe that makes more sense. If you have Hunter Dickinson back and KJ Adams back and Flory Bidunga coming in, maybe it makes more sense to bring in a developmental guy that you can kind of bring along as well. I don't know, but there's some options that you can look into, and certainly that list will grow based on guys that we don't even have on there that maybe KU is interested in and will certainly offer, or guys who have yet to even enter the portal altogether. And if that happens, we'll update you on them, and we'll get to those as we go. Talk about Zeke Mayo on tomorrow's show. You're not going to want to miss it. Make sure you subscribe to the show anywhere you get your podcast, including on our YouTube page. See you next time with LOJ.